So the question is why we have so much inconsistency with the swing in particular. We're getting good yardage, says 7 iron, 170 yards. That's a good number, to be honest with you. And overall, this is definitely like a potential for a single handicap. I actually think they said 10 handicap. So this is a great swing. And the fix here is our backswing, and it's the importance of keeping connection with our right elbow into our body and our trunk. And what happens is if we get disconnected and we have a very vertical swing, and like this works great, we can think like, Justin Thomas has a very high swing. It's not that it's a bad position overall, but when we start to combine a few things together, we can see how we're just out of sync a little bit coming down, and particularly through our level checks, our hands and our club pretty much remain open the entire time. It's just our athleticism, honestly, that's closing it down, and we're having some pretty decent results. So the posture and everything like that setup looks pretty good. The one thing is we're going to start to see a little bit of this what we call S posture. So we have our rounded back. And so one of the big problems with this is a lot of our rotation is going to come from the middle of the back, and it's going to put excessive strain on our lower back if we have a large hip turn or we have a lot of a squat. This is a swing that's going to create a lot of side bending issues. And so when we start to take the club back, our first spot is we're actually pretty good. We can see we're loading up onto our back leg. Club face and hand position are awesome. To be honest with you, this is like a solid first positional check. As we start to get through into the top of the backswing here, our next spot, hands around shoulder height, our club path is inside the ball. So overall, again, looking great. Our weight has shifted quite a bit onto our right leg, and we're going to start to see how we start to get a lot of straightness into that leg. And the hard part about this is it pretty much takes the muscles of our glute and the muscles in our legs out of the equation. And so we start having a big bracing effect on our leg, and the rotation starts to have a translational force, or basically we're going to start to move sideways because we're going to continue to rotate and we're going to lose our balance because we're lifting our arms. And so that's going to force us basically forward onto the ball. So if we had a face-on view in comparison to this, we would start to see a lean towards the ball. So as we start to get all the way to the top, this is where that disconnection and basically the rotational problems that we're having in the hip are going to start to elevate the swing. And so our hands are getting well above our plane. And so what the plane is our shoulders are like this. And so we're kind of taking this angle in relation. And, so if we have someone that's above the plane, we're looking at the hands above that spot versus someone that's below the plane, their hands would be below the spot. And so when we get up like this, it creates, again, a lot of our separation here. And when we start to come down, we can see all at the top, basically, and you got a few clouds coming through there. But the position of our hands into the club, everything looks good. There's a question about grip change, but honestly, I think this looks great. Our club is, let's use an actual straight line. Our club is, a little bit different from our arm plane. And so this isn't necessarily a bad thing because we're more in a closed direction. So the more that this toe, or basically the flatter this red plane is to it, we're going to have more of a closed club face. And so we're pre-shut. And so this is probably because we're having the swing pattern where we're fighting a slice quite a bit because our swing path is going to be quite aggressive. In order to compensate for being so high, is that we have to come basically straight down now and then somehow dump the club underneath the ball and then have this like nasty release to the left. And so when we start to come down, we're going to see how our hands in line with our shoulders again. So our next positional check, our club is well inside the ball. And so this is where a lot of different swings will talk about shallowing. And so what that means is basically our club plane from here is going to come down in order for us to continue to make our turn without hitting the ground early. And so there's a few different problems that happen when we get here. One of the most common ones is early extension, as well as leaning back on the ball. And so this player does early extension quite well, probably a little bit lean, but it's really hard to say from this face angle. We would need to have something front on. And so as the hands continue to come down, what we want to see from looking at that shallowing is if we looked at that angle, now we're starting to create a line that's more towards the ball and connected. But we want to start to see this shaft line start to intersect the bicep. And what that means is if we kind of take like this angle here, if we had our club path somewhere around that angle as we're rotating through, that would mean we're on plane. So we can see the difference between here is quite a bit. So again, we're above the plane. The hands coming down into the hips, into the hitting area. The thing to notice here is this isn't a bad spot, but we can see how perpendicular our hips are in relation to the ball and our body, is that we're not having the ability to rotate our hips around. And when we start to have that clearing, that's going to aid in the shallowing of the club. So because we come from such a high position, we can't use our lower body effectively to clear. And so we end up having to have a very handsy swing. And so this is where the inconsistency comes from. Because if we have a swing that's, say, 10% the legs and everything else is the body, then the hands are going to end up doing the majority of the work because it's the thing holding the club. And so when we come down, we can see how vertical our club is. The number's kind of irrelevant. But so this means is that if we have something that matches our spine, which truthfully looks here is like, generally speaking, we're in pretty decent control. This is why we can have a low handicap with this. But the openness of this club is, we would love to see if we had proper posture. This is where the S kind of comes back. We talked about in the very beginning, is that our rotational point is now somewhere in the middle of our back versus it should be somewhere on the axis of our hips. And because we're getting a lot of it through the back, we're going to end up having a very straight, because this is where the fulcrum is now. So if we think about, a player like Tommy Fleetwood has this, kind of arched back as he goes through, but his swing is very aggressive with the upper body. So he's basically saying, okay, legs, I'll do my thing, but if I can maintain like that triangle position, that pendulum, and just rip through, that's one of his swing thoughts he talks about. And it's able to create a lot of consistency. And so his speed is basically saying, okay, I'm going to basically stay here and just rip my arms. And as long as he can keep the weight in his arms, it'll kind of take the stress off his back. And so because we have a lot of this early extension, this is basically our butt, everything obviously standing up. But because we're having that early extension, now we're having to dump the club behind. And we can see into the impact, again, just how basically straight up we are. So it's a very nonchalant swing, which, again, if we have our rhythm and everything is okay, but we can see how aggressive we are. I mean, this is like a money position, this extension, very low to the ground. Like, this is a fantastic full release. And we've had to have that full release. This player talks about kind of feeling like they're leaning back. And this is because the hands need as much time as possible to kind of create that strike. And so we're going to hit a fade predominantly. If we get a little hooky or whatnot, this is going to be dependent upon the ball position and just where that strike is. It's going to be very hard if the bottom of the arc, and this is where face on video you'll be able to see more, but if the bottom of our arc is somewhere, let's just say, that's our line for the ball. If the bottom of the arc is somewhere behind here, we now have 4 different types of shots that we can hit depending upon where the face is, and if the heel or the base of the club is kind of hitting behind the ball or in the ball. But we're not going to create a divot that's very much in front of the ball unless we do have, we kind of maintain that aggressive angle of attack that we had, and we're going to have a big beaver pelt that goes out to the left. But we're going to essentially always be blocking the shots to the right because the club face will never have a chance to close because we're in such an open position that we're going to have to, when we get really steep, it actually opens the face more. And so it'll be just very difficult to actually hit a snap draw with that. Sure, prove me wrong. I'm sure there's plenty of people that can, but it's very difficult. Overall, the follow through and full release of that club's fantastic. And, we could just see how balanced this is. And so again, like, this is not a bad golf swing. If we can work on probably the most important thing, which is if we get a plane line, from our shoulders into our hips, is that if our club doesn't work so vertical here, like, this is okay. But if we can keep more bend in our knee and really feel like we're trying to brace and almost have our lower body resist the upper body instead of having the lower body get out of the way and just have the upper body completely fold over and rotate. If we can have that resist and those can counteract each other, it'll be much easier for the body to be able to maintain the position and look at Tommy Fleet would be a great comparison of how, with that S posture here, with that curved back, how we can kind of create some opposing forces in our lower and our upper body in order to create kind of like this bowstring effect that, all right, this is the end of my swing. Something like this is where the tempo is driven, is that when we open that hip all the way up, is that we can probably keep swinging. Like there's no reason why this is, can't keep going that way. We could lay this club all the way down and get John Daly. And that's the thing, is that we're getting rid of the hips or our back and do all the work, but we're going to have such a hard time getting it. John Daly obviously did very well, and that's the continuation of the swing. And so having something where we can use both the lower and the upper body, it's not only a power source, but it's a great way to start to learn what the end of the swing should feel like, where the restrictions in your muscles are. Great swing though, must say.